Going to show you how I create these 3D space animations from a single image. We'll be using this image of mine of the Rosette Nebula. The software that you'll need is Adobe After Effects, Photoshop, and a video editing software such as Final Cut Pro or iMovie will work. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is start in Photoshop, and we're going to be working with one of these pictures of mine for this tutorial of the Rosette Nebula. And what you want to do is determine what you want as the foreground, what portions of the nebula, and what portions of the nebula that you want as the background. To me, this portion right here looks like it's would be in the foreground, and this portion here looks like it would be in the background. So we want to make a few layers for each foreground and background, and a few in between. So to do that, what we want to do is duplicate the layer a few times by holding down Command and pressing J. And then for this tutorial, I'm just going to do one quick example here. So I only need one layer. Get rid of that one. And we want to put a layer mask on, and select the brush tool and make sure that we have a very soft brush, and painting with black. Go ahead and just start erasing all the portions of the picture that we don't want as the foreground. So you just use the brush tool and erase all of the area, and then I have a few examples here. I already went through and did this whole image, so I'll shut that off and show you. This one's already been masked out for this portion, and then I did another layer and it just builds. You just want to determine which elements of the image you want to be able to render in Adobe After Effects to give it depth. So after you have masked out all these layers, what you want to do is go back in here and shut off all the layers except for the one that you want to turn on each individual layer, and go up and save each one. And you want to save them as the format in Photoshop. So after you save each one individually, then the next step is to open it all in After Effects. Okay, once we're in Adobe After Effects, first thing you want to do is create a new composition and name it whatever you want. I usually go with 4K, because you can always change the size later. But if you don't want to render it in 4K, you can always select a different size in here. So we'll hit OK, and that's our new composition. And then the next thing you want to do is go to Layers, New, Camera, and we want just a standard 50mm 2-node camera, and hit OK. And then what we want to do is open our layers that we saved in the Photoshop format. double clicking over here in this empty box, and then navigate to where we save the files, and then we want to just highlight all the files and open them. Now what you want to do is just click and drag these files down here into your timeline. If you click in the preview window here and hit Command and then the minus key, you can zoom out. Pretty much the first thing that I do is by clicking this box here, you convert the layers to 3D layers. And then the next thing that you want to do is press S on the keyboard, and that brings up the controls to adjust the scale. So we want to adjust the scale of all the layers at the same time so that they're the same scale. And then you can click and drag and move the all the layers into the position that you want the starting point to be. You want to make sure that the playhead is at the beginning, and then we want to make a keyframe by clicking this little stopwatch icon, and then press P for position, and we also want to turn those keyframes on. Okay, and now we'll close those and just click down here to deselect all of the layers, and then go into camera, and we'll bring down the camera transform options, and we want to click on position, and I just make sure there's a keyframe for all of these in case I adjust them later. Okay, now the next thing that you want to do is go up here and click on the view and click on the to view horizontal is what I like to use, and this shows you the position of the camera. I usually do 60 seconds for the timeline because generally that's all that Facebook and Instagram will allow the length. Well, Instagram, but Facebook will allow longer videos. But anyway, I usually just do 60 seconds. I like to start the camera as far back as I can. So if you get it when you turn this on for the first time, if you get a view like this, press the Command and minus key to zoom all the way out, and then if you click on the camera down here, mouse over this little square at the back of the camera. When the Z comes up, and you just click and drag, and that you can bring the camera position back. Now every time you move the camera, the scale is going to change over here, so that means that we need to go back over here, because I should have made sure that the camera position was back here at the starting position that I wanted to begin with. But this, we can fix that really easily by bringing up the scale again and just adjust the scale to where we wanted the beginning frame, which is about right there. Okay, so now after we do that, what we want to do is determine which of the layers we want closest to the camera and which ones we want furthest from the camera. So we want to move the background layer, that's the one with all the stars, to the farthest away from the camera. So I'll just go in here and shut off all of these until we find background. Yeah, I should have labeled these better for the tutorial. Okay, so once we have that, Then you want to click on it to highlight it, and then come up here in this and mouse over until you get the Z, and then drag it all the way to the back. Now what you want to do is go back into scale by hitting S, and then scale that back up. Now a good way to make sure that it's matching the other frames is to turn on another layer and see how it doesn't quite match the other layer. As long as we still have this one selected, then we can come over here and move this layer to match that layer. That way they all stay aligned and they're all the same scale. See, if I turn all these back on, then, well, most of them, but the scale is pretty close. Now it looks the same as it did before, but the background layer is way back here. So if we jump into the camera control and we move the Z axis here, position I should say, those layers will go right through right now, but the background layer is still way back there. It's right there. So we wouldn't go through that layer until the camera reaches this point clear up here. So now what we want to do is go through each one of these layers and position them in different imagine this timeline here as your depth. So we'll put the layers that we want to fly past the camera first, up closer to the camera, and the ones that we want to stay closer to the background back here. So essentially all we do is just go through each layer and determine which layer is which, move each one like I did the background, like this layer here, we'll do that, whatever we want. So I'll go through and position each layer where they belong, and then I'll explain it a little bit more. Okay, so I've spent some time rearranging all these, and I had to go in and delete a few and rename some, and go back into Photoshop and adjust some of the layers just by feathering out some of the edges, because some of them were a little too sharp. But now I've got all the layers positioned where I want them, and so I'll go into a single view here and zoom in just a little bit so you can see a little better here. Okay, so now that I have gone into the camera controls, and here, let me bring this back up a little bit. When you click on the transform tick box to drop the options down, you can see all the keyframes that I've put in here. And to do that, what you do is you just move the playhead forward, and as you're doing that, it moves the camera. Here, let me bring this back up here. That moves the camera forward. So what I did is you start out here at the beginning and create all the keyframes, and then move forward 10 seconds, and when I move forward in the 10 seconds, I come over here, and by changing these values you can move the camera. So what you do is this value is the Z axis or position, which moves it forward, so it's getting closer to each layer, and this axis here moves the camera from side to side, and this moves it up and down, and this down here, the Z rotation will rotate the camera, so it gives it that twisting effect. So you can kind of just scrub through. Now here, I'll just move it forward here just a little bit to give you an idea by clicking in the position column here, and if you hold down and drag, you can move, that's how you move the camera. If you hold down shift, it will move it much faster. And like I was saying, if you click this column here, it moves it up and down, and this one moves it side to side. Now every time I do that, it's adding keyframes over here. So since I just did that, now the animation is different because I put keyframes there, so now it'll move over towards this layer at a later time. So to get rid of those keyframes, in case you messed up, you can click on it and then just hit the delete key. So essentially all you do is just move the playhead forward and mess with these values over here until you get it where you want, and then move it forward again and give it a good amount of time between each keyframe, because if you just move it a few seconds and then make a keyframe, it'll be very jerky and it won't look natural. So you want to do, I like to do about every 5 to 10 seconds depending on the scene and how much movement I want, and that's pretty much the whole procedure that you do to get the motion and to get it to look three-dimensional, even though they are just single layers still. So after you're done doing all this, then the next thing to do is export it. And what you want to do is go to File and Export and Add to Render Queue, which will bring up this dialog box here. And then you want to go to Output 2, click that, and then you want to select whatever folder you want it to save and name it whatever you want, and then you hit save, and then go over here to this where it says lossless and select that and go to format options and go to video codec, and I like to use Apple ProRes 422 high quality. Hit OK, hit OK, and then hit render. Once the rendering is complete, you can import the video file into your favorite video editing software. I like to use Final Cut Pro, and then you can add sound effects and music.